Well, hello, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us at our session here today, talking about some of the work that SaaS and Deloitte have done together for deploying environments on AWS. My name is Ray Autar. I'm a director within our Deloitte Ecosystems and Alliances practice. I lead our global center of excellence for our SaaS technology practice. So very happy to be here to speak with you all today. I'll turn it over, and Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Mike Morris. I am the Vice President of Cloud and Infrastructure for SaaS. So I'll talk about what SaaS is and what we built with Deloitte.
Yeah. Hey, folks, I'm Josh Rucker. I'm the Chief Enterprise Architect for our cloud practice. That's in partnership with SaaS and Deloitte here.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's jump into it here. Make sure we got the right slides going here.
There you go.
So today in our agenda, you'll learn a little bit about who is SaaS, what's kind of the business challenge that's out there that people are seeing, why Deloitte? And then, of course, we're going to deep dive into some architecture. We'll get into discussing a little bit about the AWS marketplace, and then leave you with some key takeaways, and then wrap up with some Q&A for everyone as well, too. So who is SaaS?
So SaaS, as I like to say, is a data company. I mean, a real data company. So we take data in from all sorts of different sources, and we run a whole bunch of mathematics and analytics and AI on that data, and then we produce results. And those results could be for humans to consume, they could be for other applications to consume, but we're really working on data from all sorts of different sources and applying what amounts to almost 50 years of intellectual capital to that data to produce meaningful results. And we have a lot of responsibility when it comes to that data. So when you talk about our mission, vision, and purpose, and you read those, what we really talk about there is the responsibility we have to data, not just for security, but for accuracy and how it's used and how it's properly used by our customers and by SaaS. So I asked, if there are people in the room, how many people have heard of SaaS or know SaaS or use SaaS? Yeah, you guys don't count. Okay, good. So as you can see, 90% of Fortune 100, SaaS is a pretty big company, about $3 billion a year in software sales. And we sell to all customers that need analytics and mathematics on their data. We particularly focus on 4 key industries: government, finance, insurance, and life sciences. And as someone once told me one time, those are all really boring industries that have lots of money. Okay, and they also have lots of data, and they have lots of responsibilities. So when we talk about our responsibility to data in the mission, the vision, the purpose, it's because those industries are really important. You think about the data that's involved in finance, or the data that's involved in government, or life sciences when they're coming up with new prescription medications and the new scientific studies. That data is important. So our software needs to take that responsibility seriously. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the business challenge that we had. Now, I talked about in SaaS being a $3 billion company, about $500 million of that is our SaaS managed cloud services. So customers, particularly a growing number of customers, they don't want to really run SaaS software anymore. They want us to run it for them, and then they access in the cloud their SaaS software platform. So we're trying to expand that business, and what we've done is we've run our cloud business for the last several years in another cloud, but with that added some challenges. The first being an overall architecture. And that legacy architecture that we've used in the cloud came from our data center architectures that we started our hosting business about 15 years ago. So when we used that other cloud environment and started that process about 5 years ago, we essentially forklift or took that legacy architecture and applied it in the cloud. But that legacy architecture was built for data centers and colos. It wasn't built for a cloud. So about 2.5 years ago, we said we need to get to a next-gen architecture for hosting SaaS software in the cloud. And that's what we call our next-gen hosting architecture. And then shortly after we started building that, our customers said, hey, we really like this, but we need it in AWS. So that's a part of expanding our market footprint is our customers, because a lot of them have commitments to AWS, they have other applications in AWS, and data has gravity. If we're sucking a lot of data into our platform to do analytics on it, that data already exists somewhere, and for a lot of our customers, that data is in AWS. So we wanted to expand our marketplace into AWS. Simplifying delivery and operations. So as I talked about, we had our next-gen architecture, so using existing SaaS software, optimized blah, 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 cloud architecture, but essentially we had a good architecture that we use in a different cloud for hosting SaaS software, but we need to translate that into AWS. And that's where Deloitte was brought on board to help us simplify the delivery and operations of using existing architecture, but using it in AWS. And also talking about IAC and DAC and Terraform code. So I'll talk about that a little more in speed to market, but leveraging technologies that SaaS has created to do rapid software deployment into clouds. And we've adopted that in our environment, and we want to make sure we continue to use that with AWS. Security and compliance is a given. As I talked about those 4 key industries that we service, security is paramount, and compliance is also very paramount. My job in working with our managed hosting customers, we get everything from NIST to FedRAMP to what's the protected BE to all these different, IRAP is a new one in Australia that we're trying. There's probably a dozen different certifications and government compliance regulations that we have to adhere to when we're dealing with the data. Because again, especially in the managed hosting business, we see the data. Our SaaS administrators can see the data. So we have to comply with all the different compliance regulations that are out there, along with ensuring cybersecurity best practices. And then speed to market. Not only do we want to expand AWS, but how can we go faster? I talked before, we had that legacy architecture that was built for the data centers, and we wanted to get to a next gen. Part of that legacy architecture was a bit of a slow way to get the software deployed. It could take days to weeks to get a customer up and running. Now, in our cloud automation platform, using the IAC and DAC code, we can now do that in about 2 hours. And we're taking that concept and applying that in AWS with Deloitte, so we can reduce the time that we do in the legacy environment from days and weeks down to essentially a day or a week. So new customers in AWS, we want to spin them up quickly using the IAC and DAC code and get them in, access to their new environment rapidly so we can do our revenue recognition and move them into operations.
I'll cover off a little bit about our global alliance. I mean, how many people, when you hear Deloitte, I know when I meet people for the first time, they say, oh, you work for Deloitte. Aren't you an accounting firm? They just don't have the understanding of, we're a big technology consulting firm as well, too. We've got a very, very broad depth in our ecosystems and alliances, and this is where we partner with companies like SaaS to solve client problems. So as you can see from here, we've got nearly two decades worth of business relationship together in the markets. And those markets cover from banking, insurance, government, life sciences, energy, utilities, and retail. And it continues to strengthen every single year. And when I say strengthen, it's not just for us, it's strengthening for our clients. Those are the most important people at the nexus of our universe. Their business problems are the challenges that we love to accept. And it's part of our goals to make sure that we're challenged every day in solving those business problems. Our Center of Excellence is around the world. We've got major areas primarily focused in risk and regulatory. We bring together domain expertise with technology expertise to make sure that we've got a well-rounded team. So when we go into a client engagement, we cover everyone that we need to. This has been recognized by SaaS as well, too, as being Partner of the Year and various awards and recognitions to us, and we're very grateful for that. I mean, we hold that near and dear to our hearts, just like when we come to AWS and we get awards here. It's important because it's recognition for what we're doing it in the right way, as a firm and as a partnership and alliance for our clients as well, too.
I'm far too neurodivergent to stand here without holding something, so. So you've heard about who SaaS is, you've heard about the alliance, and really that's what I think brought us to the table to be that partner with SaaS to try and not only, I would say, solve a problem for them, but to truly understand their requirements. And because as exciting as building a cloud management platform is, discreetly, like if you're successful at it, it sort of disappears into the background, right? Like that's the paradox of doing something really well in operations is that the better you are at it, the more it kind of becomes less of a focal point. So we, as a team, said, okay, how can we understand the business requirements enough to drive architectural requirements? And so, first and foremost, you heard about NIST 853. We're using that as a baseline. that is actually a great place to start with well-architected foundation. We knew that we needed to turn SaaS into an as provider, so being able to shift them from someone that has large legacy builds, long timelines for implementation, those sorts of things, into something that can be fairly end-to-end automated and turnkey. Meaning that maybe a SaaS client needs a temporary ephemeral environment, spin up, spin down. Previously, that would be a huge lift, and trying to shift them closer to something that looks like, hey, can we have a pop-up sandbox and be able to destroy it for cost efficiency or other reasons, and then being able to take all of those different requirements and architectural guidelines and bake them in something that is globally scalable. Right, you have data sovereignty, you have different countries. We'll talk a bit in a bit around like the hub and spoke model and how we sort of achieved that. That all kind of came together to say, okay, now we can enable SaaS for its clients to become an as-a-service provider. And so when we came to the table and first started deciding like how we wanted to do this with SaaS, we said, hey, here is the completely a la carte, start from scratch, roll your own cloud management platform, and that is X amount of dollars. Or you can take what Deloitte has started with. So we have the Open Cloud Management Platform, which hosts currently about 175 different clients and across all geos. And we said, or we can go ahead and there may be some design choice restrictions, but with this methodology, we can get you kind of 2/3 of the way there right out of the gate. Start applying our best practices that we've seen work in production. And offer you some cool things kind of right out of the box, meaning having a portal that your clients go and rapidly onboard, integrations into your ITSM system, and then things like providing API integration into cybersecurity tooling for workload protection and cyber services. As well as we have an integrated control framework that pulls from like 13 different large NIST and other compliance frameworks that we can kind of translate into AWS config and other configuration as code to help kind of help accelerate the process of NISTizing these environments. And then integration into your existing observability and cloud economics tools, which is important because CloudWatch and well, we won't name the other cloud provider, for the sake of being here in the home base of Amazon. But you do need observability and visibility across multiple ecosystems. And if you're going to be an as-a-service vendor in today's market, you're going to have to be able to meet your clients where they are. But you're still going to need to be able to have central visibility and central control. And so, we've already done that. We manage across like 6 cloud service providers, even some of the smaller ones that we would choose not to if we had our own choice. But with this came some automations right out of the box for us, right? We wanted to be able to give SaaS clients rapid onboarding. We wanted to be able to use their existing CI/CD pipelines and use our existing structures. We wanted to be able to use their existing automation repositories and a lot of the templates that they had already built and that we had already built, bring those things together to be able to drive the rapid onboarding and to be able to drive infrastructure provisioning. So one of the big challenges with having a hub and spoke model is that when you have clients that need to live out on the spoke, and we'll talk about what that means in a second, they need to be independent, but they still need to be managed and governed centrally from that hub. And so then you create a dependence on that hub, and then you need to be able to move it or fail to and from various hubs very quickly to meet your SLAs and your uptime requirements. So all of this came together, match made in heaven, all that good stuff. Let's talk about the architecture. So I'm going to warn you, this next slide was so much cooler before lawyers got involved. These were all like logos, and we were showing how cool we were and that we knew all the cool new companies that you're not allowed to say the names of unless you like go and check with their lawyers, and there were like 12 of them. And so instead what you have are a series of small bits of text, some that are thinly veiled riddles. So if you can figure out who these are, some of them might be Azure, then you can. So I'm just going to fly past that. But let's talk about the high-level overall architecture for the hub. This is really where our privileged access management, this is where our teams come in and live to provide that centralized observability. This is where log aggregation occurs. This is also what drives some of the data residency. So these hubs span across, today, both the US and EU geographic locations, meaning that we've got sample points, right? Your European data can go be independent. We can still push policies, right, to keep things centralized, but you still have that degree of data segregation that you need to maintain your NIST compliance. And more importantly, there's logic to the way the accounts are structured. So when you have dedicated accounts for security, logging, core services, those sorts of things, it makes troubleshooting, it makes mean time to resolution so much more simple when you're able to get appropriately tagged operational data where it needs to be, and because if and when there is a problem, being able to go back, look at your documentation, being able to look at the data, and make decisions actionably based off of it is one of the most important things for reducing outages. And more importantly, if you're going to continue to drive operational automation, and a lot of what we did here with SaaS is build that foundation to then say, what does more autonomous operation look like as you start to shift into the world of ML models for observability, and you need to have appropriate data structure and foundation even at that operational level to make all that possible. And so then there's also administrative isolation, meaning that you can have privileged access, but you can govern and control that privileged access to limit your security or your threat surface as much as possible. And then more importantly, you need a pretty simplified spoke. So we chose to, for each client, give them a dedicated account and have VPCs do the isolation for their various stages. This helps in a way to, again, like if clients wanted ephemeral environments, this makes it a lot easier for that to be possible. They still have the isolation that they need through the VPCs. And we're able to take the DAC, some of the existing SaaS automation, and kind of push that through existing pipelines to launch those spokes. What's really cool about this as well is the spokes can stand on their own, meaning that if there is, and this would never happen, like an S3 outage or something, if that ever happens in US East 1, that hub can actually come down, we can shift to another availability zone, we can shift it to another geo, and those spokes can be repointed and very, very rapidly, just using infrastructure as code to prevent any sort of like ongoing outages or service disruptions.
I just want to call that out. That's one of the key points of the design, is that the legacy design I've talked about was a shared architecture design. So you had shared common services and shared gateways and stuff like that. So one customer could impact another. That's not this. This now, as it says, is a dedicated spoke account for each customer. So everything a customer needs to operate independently is in their spoke. So they're independent, they're shared nothing, which is important not only from data security and data compliance, but from operational perspective too, is now one customer is not impacted by another customer. So everything they need is in that spoke.
And even cost control and billing, right? I mean, so it's funny, there are parts of like, I want to start a SaaS, SaaS offering that you wouldn't think would be the hard parts. A lot of what this is really easy. Like, this is well tread, well architected. Like, as long as you're using best practices, you're going to be successful in building something like this. What can be really tricky is after you launch something, is understanding how much more your clients can expect from that offering, right? So if you give a mouse a cookie kind of a situation. And so now if an individual client of SaaS's needs to blow out or expand or is over-consuming, there's an easy way to find that, to charge back, to show back, to tag back, all that good stuff, which impacts the business model is right. Meaning, like, I think if you are in a situation where you can't have all of that visibility, then all of a sudden it becomes much harder to create a pricing model that is advantageous for your client and you as a service provider. And what ends up usually happening is your client ends up having to pay more for assumptions that you make, right? And so this way, it's much easier to support as a all-you-can-eat or as-you-use-it model.
And before you go to the next one, and adding to that, I'll talk, one of the things was speed to market in my slide. Another great thing about this spoke architecture is that in our shared environment, shared architecture, since it was built kind of on data centers, if we wanted to move into a new region, well, we'd have to go in and build the shared services, which would take about 4 weeks. With this now in a spoke, it's anywhere AWS has a region, and it's just automated deployment. So if we have a customer that says, hey, great, I want your SaaS hosted services, but it's got to be in AWS Indonesia. Great, point the automation at and deploy. It's not go in there for 4 weeks and build a whole bunch of core services. It's just deploy the Spoke with automation. So it's a lot faster for us, for customers who not only say, I need to be in AWS, but I need to be in this specific country or this specific region. It's great. Now we can do it with the Spoke because they're all independent of each other.
Which is the right way to do BCDR, right? Like if you're building deployment automation and then you're doing something else for disaster recovery, like did you really build deployment automation? Mm-hmm. And let's talk just a little bit high level about the network architecture. So we went with a global WAN approach, which drives a lot of that Spoke isolation, meaning really the back-end WAN is what is allowing us to have the Spokes be independent and be able to be repointed very quickly. As well, our infrastructure as code allows us to have, I think it's up to 5,000 VPC peer connections and without having to push against default limits. And then we're also able to automatically propagate routes, right, upon spin up. So as soon as a Spoke comes up, it phones home back to home base, and it's turned on, it's ready to go. And this was really important for us because we wanted to make sure that anything that we were doing up until this point was not going to slow down the onboarding approach. When you're providing a data platform for clients, right, it's already tricky enough to like figure out how do you get all their data in, how do you go through all of those controls and data pipelines, and so we wanted this to be like as discreet as possible. You fire off some end-to-end automations, things turn on, they connect the way that they're supposed to, and then you're on to more interesting things, which is how do I get my data and how do I get access to it. Let's see. Definitely wanted to throw a plug for Security Hub in here. We had, if you are a huge fan of NIST 853, you know that there's something like 256 controls.
325.
325. We'll update that. That's why I'm an architect, not a cyber architect. Most of them are, I always think this is funny too, like if you spend time and you look at the special publication and you look at like what is being implemented, there are all decisions that you should have made anyway, which is great. But Security Hub gives I think an easy way to keep track of whether or not you're meeting those controls, you're maintaining them. We're also working, I think, with SaaS also to say like to put in the correct configuration flags in such a way that we could launch like partially NIST environments, or if it's a sandbox that doesn't need to meet regulations, but it needs to move quicker, be able to turn those off without deviating from our existing code base. But Security Hub has made that much easier to work with. And then, of course, we just wanted to, I think, visualize, kind of where those controls touch the various AWS services. Let's see. I think with that, we'll jump back into Marketplace. I'm going to hand back to Ray.
Sure. So AWS Marketplace, how do you buy things like what's being delivered here now with automated deployments? One of the things is, there's been the traditional contracting with vendors and so forth, and that tends to be a long process in terms of getting things correct. But if you're looking at accelerating things, how can you leverage tools within AWS, such as the Marketplace, to do contracting? So private offers can be also created. How does that help a customer? If you've got pre-committed spend, EDPs that need to be burnt down that are underutilized, you can almost think of it as pre-funding something for the future as well too. There's a bunch of benefits that are around this, right? You're connected into the AWS ecosystem, simplified deployments that we heard about, streamlined billing and licensing, so single delivery of billing, and faster times to market. Procurement obviously becomes a little bit easier as well too if you have a direct method for delivery as well too, and flexible and scalable architecture. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the compelling events and stories around the use cases next of why people are kind of making some leaps and bounds into cloud with SaaS technology right now. So let me jump over to the next slide here, and we'll go into some use cases. I'll kind of treetop this and roll this up a little bit. I like to tell this story all the time because we had a client that had some compelling events. So they had two major compelling events where one is that they were on a data center that they had to exit because it was actually shutting down. And then the other thing too was that they had some software that had not been maintained and upgraded for a long period of time. So part of their cloud strategy is that they needed to move into AWS. And somebody had said, hey, let's just take the existing software package that we have today and lift and shift it and drop it into AWS. Well, the legacy SaaS software was not architected to be cloud native. Via, as the next generation, is cloud native. So there's native integrations, CAS computing engines that, if you're not familiar with it, it's computing in memory as well too. So some of the things that the client had thought about was, it's just going to be cheaper, faster to just get it done and put in there. So they decided to engage us because the burning question from the client was like, how do I actually do this? How do I plan to do this migration and so forth? So we've been doing migrations for greater than 5 years now, and we got a lot of lessons learned coming out of those efforts. So we've built accelerators, blueprints, documents that will help clients plan for a path that has successful outcomes. So we took that, applied this to our client, and what they were able to do was understand that if they were going to do it the way that they wanted to do it, it was going to cost them double. Meaning that they would move their legacy version to the cloud, and then from the cloud, then move from the legacy version in the cloud to the cloud native version. We showed them how it became financially viable to do everything in one shot. And it actually just cost them probably 3% more than what they had in their original spend. And we actually did it in less time that they were expecting it to happen because we leveraged our accelerators going forward. So that's kind of some of the big use cases. I will call out some other things too around just simply data security. SaaS in the Via world of things being cloud native actually gets into leveraging and integrating with a variety of different ecosystems and alliances for data and enhancing that security as well too. I would say it's almost a democratization of even data access now. For most of us that know the SaaS world, data is natively stored in SAS 7b.dot formats. That's no longer the case. That can be stored in anything natively integrated into Via. Not to say it didn't happen in the previous version of SaaS as well too, but it's a little bit easier in Via today as well. Anything else to add, Mike?
I will say I always love the storage use cases as I run the infrastructure and cloud. My former employer was a storage company who always talked about being a data company. Now I work at a data company who worries about storage. A lot. So we use a lot of storage and it's very expensive. So optionally, storage use case is important to us because it's a big driver. And part of Deloitte helping us out was, again, taking our architecture but translating it into how we would build that architecture in AWS. And a big part of that translation is storage. And because when we suck all that data in, we got to store it. We got to not only do it optimally, but do it in a way that we can access it very rapidly. The analytics engine is a huge I/O pull from the storage, so it has to be very high performance storage.
And the last thing I would say is the scalability of SaaS now as well too. Via in cloud, it's incredible. We're seeing, at least from our use cases that we're delivering, we're seeing up to 60% gains in efficiency in execution just by moving the workloads to cloud.
So they've been hinting at the Via architecture and our software. So this is the high-level Via architecture. SaaS has, I wouldn't call it legacy, since I work for the company, we'll call it traditional architecture, which is called SaaS 9. That is an on-premise data center software product that sells very well today and a lot of huge multinational companies still rely on. Our cloud-based architecture is Via, and it's a Kubernetes-based architecture that has, let's see, 4 or 5 major components here. So first one is the microservices web apps. That's essentially the user interaction part of the Kubernetes environment. So how do users access the SaaS application, manage the data, and do work with it? Then in the next column there, you get the SaaS compute services and the commodity services. Well, that's where when we pull in all the data, we got to store it inside the application. So those are the databases, and then we have to have compute nodes that services that data and prepares it and stuff. And then the CAS cluster. I think you just mentioned it. But CAS is where all the SaaS, software, analytics, mathematics, AI goes on. So once the data is in the databases, then CAS pulls it into in-memory computing. So it's all done in memory. And it's very fast analytics and mathematics running against the data to produce the results. So CAS is a big driver of compute costs because we're doing it all in memory for the most rapid execution we can. And then finally you get some ingress nodes of how we connect all those different data sources, as Ray was mentioning, and then you get your kind of core services that run all inside the Kubernetes cluster. And each customer would get one or multiple Kubernetes clusters in their spoke in their AWS account. So we build it all up. Each customer gets their own account. We deploy each customer into their own spoke in any region in the world they want. And inside that spoke, then we would deploy one or multiple Kubernetes clusters with the SaaS software installed in it.
And I'm not sure if it stands to reason that SaaS has better or worse lawyers than us because they were allowed to use logos. Just want to point
Speaking of logos, so all the logos that got sucked out of the slide he was talking about went into the next slide. So
Yeah.
go to the next slide.
We got him.
Got him. He got him in. Okay, so we felt you all needed a really complex architecture slide to
We're at
validate
reInvent.
this. Yeah, exactly. We're doing a presentation. You got to have a cool architecture slide, right? I'll start off by pointing to the top, though. Over on the left in purple, data management. Suck the data in, prepare the data, store the data. Then you move to the middle, the analytics. You do the analysis, you do models, model registration, model monitor. That's the analytics part. That's the SaaS bread and butter. You suck the data in, you managed it, then you put it through the compute engine, and then the last part, then you consume it. Whether it's through like visual analytics where humans get in there and look at the data and they can see charts and graphs and displays, or we can prepare it for other applications to use and stuff. One of the anecdotes I like to tell is if you're on one of those, you use your credit card and you swipe it, and all of a sudden you get a text alert saying, we've detected maybe fraud on your credit card. It happens like that. Good chance that went through SaaS software at some bank. Okay, so that's the analytics running in real-time memory and then transferring that information quickly over to the consumption part that isn't necessarily a human looking at a screen, but it comes automatically through to a text message. So there you go. Suck the data in, analyze the data, produce the results. That's the core capabilities of what we're doing for customers in this environment. And now you can describe all the logos. I will say at the bottom there, I won't make him do the bottom. The bottom is the SaaS software. So when we talk about those three major components, to suck the data in, analyze the data, produce the results, you can see the SaaS components there that make all that possible.
Well, and beyond just the completely hubris-driven wanting to flex our muscles, we did want to show, I think, that modern software design, especially cloud-native software design, has gotten to a point where, I mean, you can see the layers of abstraction and complication that are built here. You're not going to get to performant scale and assume that you can build a team big enough to hand manage these things, right? You can see just from what's being depicted, this is like if everything works appropriately, right? And so what we're talking about is the infrastructure is code that has to be built, the configuration is code. I mean, when you go to make a change to something and version control it across, eventually hundreds of clients for SaaS, you need to be able to have the appropriate modularity in what you've written and what you've built in such a way that you can scale appropriately. And more importantly, the systems are preparing, sending, and receiving the types of data in the structure that it needs to do its job correctly. Because you're not going to have some superhero on the team as a sysadmin that's just going to go there and pull an all-nighter anymore. We're far past that layer. And so I think it's really important. It was important to us when we get to work with clients that understand that vision and work together with us to say, okay, we get that, and we want to invest on the front end to make sure that as we grow and scale this, that we can continue to build that data quality, build that data sanity into our operations so that it is tenable over time. And I think that's been really special working Deloitte and SaaS together is, getting to be with a data, client who is a data company that gets it. And it's like, okay, yeah, we understand that we can't just not do a great job at doing operational documentation or our Git flow or, that's not the place to cut corners. So I think that's one of the things that I think this slide does a pretty good job of just sort of visualizing is like there's a lot going on and it's not going to get less complicated. So you have to really drive the foundations of well-architected best practices and operational rigor to make sure that you're able to keep up with what your clients need. Move forward.
Is it clicking? There
We're
we
good.
go.
So we threw a couple of slides at the end here that are like some of the things that we were most proud of as a team, joint, like SaaS and Deloitte. Like I had said, we started off with a pretty solid foundation with the open cloud management platform, but we really took it to places that we didn't, previously. Like one of the things that you do as a managed services provider when you're hosting, hundreds of clients is you try to become the lowest common denominator cloud platform, meaning that you have to provide a service that is generic and flexible enough to integrate with everybody's line of business applications that they're going to host on the cloud, right? Where we got to go with SaaS is really exciting for us because we got to then take and fully extend that concept of a cloud management platform into something that was unique and disparate specifically for SaaS. But with that same, I think because we had so much time and grade at building a multi-cloud operational platform, we came in with the idea of like, hey, today your clients are pulling you to AWS. There may be other cloud vendors, service providers that you will also need to extend to. And eventually, as a service provider for your clients, you're going to need to be able to stretch across all three of them, four of them. Pretty soon it will probably be more of a hybrid cloud approach. You're going to have legacy clients that are going to want to run pieces of that independently on their own legacy hardware, or new colos and move the workloads back and forth. And there's just I think that was one of the biggest wins for us as a joint team, was to be able to get together and say, okay, now let's take this to that nth degree, and then look at each other and say, where do we go from here? Like, how do we continue to drive that? We also, like I said, one of the other big things was making sure that disaster recovery was baked into the deployment. I mean, obviously there are a couple more levers and switches that you have to pull, but we wanted reusable modular code that could be used in the real world. One of the cool things about having an operations group come and do your implementation is that they care about operations, which is not always the case for systems integrators. Let's see. Yeah, we focused on scalable modules, talked about that, develop parameters. Yeah, a lot of this is just tooting our own horn, which around how we wrote all of the good IAC, which is a struggle. Like when you get to the point of like trying to build a globally scalable platform, there's no like, is there a small TF-vars file? Nope, there's not. You're gonna have some complication in there, and it's been interesting to watch the teams, put operational rigor in place to be able to manage those requirements for the parameterization of the infrastructure as code. Jump
Go to the
forward.
next one.
And then this is sort of what could we have done differently. I think to sum this one up, it really came down to us learning to work together as service provider and client. There are a lot of requirements from NIST. There's a lot where we had already built something most of the way and needed to make changes to it. And I think you'll never get away from the blocking or tackling or the fundamentals that you need to make a project successful. And so we said, okay, well, even if the majority of the things we're going to put on this are stuff that we already knew about, that we still wanted to call it out, because it's like every day, remembering that you still have to learn to dribble and pass. And so getting the folks involved at the right time, which is usually well ahead of when they get called into the project, is a big deal. And being respectful of your client's time. So like when a client comes and asks you to build a platform for them, it's a delicate balance of taking up too much of their time to give them exactly what they need. Like, I don't know if you remember that episode of Seinfeld where he had like that personal assistant that was like asking him like 36,000 questions for every decision that he made. That can happen, but finding that fine line of being able to say, we respect you, we respect your design decisions. We also have some strong opinions, but we're not going to drown you, in decisions. So I think us, having to kind of toe that line and find where that lives. I think we got there, and I think I look forward to what we're going to do from here.
Yeah, I think what I'll say, you guys, the flexibility has been great.
So that, as you said, building a cloud platform for a very complex analytics platform, there's going to be changes. And you guys have been very flexible about incorporating those changes and adjusting, because it's not a straight path from A to B in this project. But I appreciate that the most, is the flexibility and understanding that we're making changes and new things come up and things change and we adjust accordingly. So thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's important also, as another key takeaway, is that we invested a lot of time as our firms to do this because of the biggest challenges that our customers are facing with us. And the message that I have for our customers is that if you're on this journey of doing modernization to the cloud with SaaS, with AWS, we've built basically a alliance partnership approach to this that you will not find anywhere else but at this tri-party group here. What we've learned through those accelerators to de-risk your projects, to save money, take costs out of the business, retire technical debt, all of those things can be brought to bear through discovery processes that we can help guide you through as well, to building business cases, roadmaps, et cetera. That's how we're differentiating to help our customers drive